Hello, welcome to Jason the Old Millennial. My name is Jason, speaking here in my basement in the great state of Kansas. And so I'm doing a video talking about the music of 1967 because tomorrow on my channel, I'm doing a live stream at 8:30 p.m. Central Standard Time covering the top. Well, I'm going to be joined by also Nick from Townsend 505 and Brian from Briar's Music Showcase. Three of us are going to reveal our top 10 albums of 1967. We've been doing this series since 1960. Me and Nick started on the series, so we've gone from 60 now to 67 is our next year that we're covering in music. So we all have listened to a bunch of albums and we're all coming up with our favorite stuff. Another really great year in music, obviously. As all this mid to late 60s, it's like you can't have a bad year. I mean, the Beatles are still putting out some great stuff. You got the Beach Boys. Well, Beach Boys aren't putting as good stuff as they were in the 66, 65, but Bob Dylan, you know, I mean, and now in 67, what makes it a little different, I think, is we're getting more into psychedelic music is definitely getting, we got that in 66, but 67, definitely psychedelic music is hitting even harder. That's kind of the big thing, I think, at this point. Feels like folk rock music is starting to be on its way out, which is weird because it's really just started to 65. So it really didn't have that big of a, I mean, we're still going to get maybe a little bit more folk rock, I guess, with the Crosby, Stills, Nash albums coming out in 69. But it feels like definitely psychedelic rock is the big thing. I mean, the British Invasion has already happened. We pretty much, all those British bands are still putting out stuff like The Who, The Kinks, you know. All those great British bands are still putting out great music. But I said the big thing is a lot of bands are transitioning to the psychedelic rock era, and that seems to be the way things are going. And we definitely get a lot of new bands that are really significant this year as well. But anyway, so talking about the year 1967, I like to talk about the top 10 best-selling albums of the year. It kind of gives you an idea of what people were listening to, what was selling the most at this time. Yeah, so it's cool to see that number one, the best-selling album, is probably one of the biggest albums of all time, one of the most popular albums of all time, and that is Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles, which I do have that album. Might be in one of my boxes here. I haven't pulled out yet, but yeah, Sgt. Pepper's. I mean, this is an album considered to be one by many people to be the best album of all time. It used to be number one on Rolling Stone's 500 best albums for quite a long time until it got it lost that number one spot to another album. But it definitely is this album that really showed the Beatles' experimentation. You see that in 66 with Revolver, but 67 with Sgt. Pepper is definitely seen that more even. Like I said, you're seeing a little psychedelic rock with like Lucy and Sky with Diamonds. And a little bit harder rock with like the opening Sgt. Pepper's, but you know, a lot of different stuff in that album. Of course, The Day in the Life is the big closer of that album. Like Losing Sky was a big hit. A Little Help from My Friends was a big hit for Ringo. She's Leaving Home is one of the great deep cuts on that album. But yeah, and then you get some kind of more Paul's, what do you want to call it? More non-serious songs like When I'm 64, yeah, Fixing the Hole, you know. So you get some more of Paul's more obscure songs on the album. But it's an extremely popular album even to this day. And so it's cool to see that it was definitely number one in 1967. I think it's their best-selling album, I believe, of their studio albums. I mean, this was the big album for the Beatles, so it's like, and the Beatles are, of course, still at the height of their fame. They're not touring anymore, but their albums are, of course, still doing very well. And their overall look is changing a bit. I mean, they also put out Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever out this year, which were big hit songs as well. And they put on that music video of Strawberry Fields, which was a big deal. Anyways, and they also put out, I believe this year they put out All You Need Is Love is the big single they put out later that I'll talk about here as well. So definitely still the biggest band in the world, the Beatles. So no surprise they're number one here. And it's like one of those years where no matter what, it's like no matter what album you put out this year, it's always gonna be in second place. Sgt. Pepper's, like nothing's gonna beat that album. But yeah, so cool to see that number one here. Number two is The Doors by The Doors. So I didn't realize how big of a seller this was, but The Doors' debut album did very well. I know it has Light My Fire was like the huge hit off this album. I forget what else is on here, but I'm not the biggest Doors fan, so I'm not a big fan of the album, but I know people that like Doors do. This is one of their big albums. This and like LA Woman, I think, and Something Strange, I think, is another one. But anyways, yeah, so Doors second already on their debut album, so they hit off pretty hard on the first album, which is interesting. And like I said, they definitely are getting to that psychedelic kind of era type music that really fits them well. Number three is a little surprising. It is the greatest hits of Patsy Cline. So I don't know what exactly is going on that Patsy Cline, because she passed away, I think, a little earlier in the 60s. I remember I covered that on a different channel, or a different, stream, or a different, talking about, top 10 albums. But yeah, so Patsy Cline, so I don't know what the resurgence of her is at this time, or just they decided to put a greatest hits out, and she was still popular enough that she did really well, and it came third in the charts, her greatest hits album. Of course, she's kind of an older country singer. I don't listen to all that much myself, but what's her, I'm trying to think of her big song. Is it I'm Sorry? No, I forget. But anyways, so yeah, we get Patsy Cline here, which is weird because she doesn't really fit the genre of psychedelic rock of this era. But number four, we get another Beatles album, Magical Mystery Tour, which is that's an awesome album, one of my favorite Beatles albums. And it's obviously, this is the American LP, because this didn't come out in England. They just put out a double EP of the songs that came out in the movie that they made that came out later that year. It came out like in like December of 1967. And so this is more of an American album. This is the American album, Magical Mystery Tour, which again had all the songs in the movie, and then they put on all the big singles that came out that weren't in the album. So it's hard not to miss with that when you're able to put Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane and All You Need Is Love and Goodbye, Hello, Goodbye, put all these big like singles. That's what makes that album so cool, is that second side is just full of big hits. And first side's so great too, with I'm the Walrus, the Magical Mystery Tour, and Fool on the Hill. Really great stuff. But yeah, it's an absolute, and again, it's definitely psychedelic with I Am the Walrus. Definitely delves into even Baby You're a Rich Man, I think. Definitely a lot of psychedelic music in that as well. Number five, we get another greatest hits, and this is Bob Dylan's greatest hits. Yeah, interesting. We're only in 1967, so I mean, this is only like 5 years in Bob Dylan's career, and already coming out with like greatest hits. I always feel like greatest hits should be after like you're in business for like 20 years, and then you should put out like a greatest hit. So, but I guess they knew it'd sell well, so good on them, I guess, and they did very well. Reached number 5 in the overall charts, or best-selling albums of that year. I wonder if it's one I've had before. So I remember my parents had a greatest hits that I used to listen to quite a bit. I mean, still you got a lot of great stuff, because I mean, you're talking, from Freewheelin' to Bob Dylan, to The Times They Are Changing, to Highway 61 Revisited, to not quite Blonde on Blonde. So this is before Blonde on Blonde was an album. So everything before that, still there's a lot of good music on those albums. And I don't know if I'm forgetting anything, but those are the big ones I can think of. So yeah, lots of great stuff. Kind of early greatest hits album of his. I think he still has Blonde on Blonde and Blood on the Tracks, for goodness sakes, with a lot of good songs on it coming out later. Number 6, we get Are You Experienced by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. So debut album of Jimi Hendrix coming out this year. And yeah, this is an album I absolutely love. It's one of the best psychedelic rock albums of all time. Some of the best guitar playing you're ever going to hear, I think, on this album. And it's kind of almost a greatest hits. It's my favorite Jimi Hendrix album, because you get, Purple Haze on there, you got Hey Joe, you got Foxy Lady, you got The Wind Cries Mary. I mean, just some of his biggest hits are on this album. And like I said, the guitar playing is just out of this world good. Like, never heard anybody play like this, and I never heard anybody play like it since. I feel like no one's played this good before. or after our experience. So yeah, so cool to see this get number 6, and good start for Jimi Hendrix's career. Number 7, we're going to Barbra Streisand for A Christmas Album. So again, Barbra Streisand is still very popular at this time. Seems like her albums do very well. She gets nominated for Grammys every year. I can't say I've ever listened to a Barbra Streisand album, though I think she can sing. She has a good voice. But yeah, her Christmas album, haven't heard before. I wouldn't mind hearing it. Like I said, I like Christmas albums, and she has a good enough voice. I'd be interested in maybe hearing that at some point. But yeah, again, Christmas, very popular here. It's number 7. Number 8, we got More of the Monkees by the Monkees. So this is the Monkees' second album. And in my opinion, a much better album than the debut. The debut only had like Last Train to Clarksville was like their big hit on that album. But this album has a lot of good stuff, including my favorite song, I'm a Believer. It's probably my favorite Monkees song. So that was a huge hit for them. There's a lot of good stuff on here, if I remember right. I think Not Your Stepping Stone is on here. She or something like that. I don't have the album in front of me, so I can't remember everything, but there's a lot of good songs on this album. I think a really good second album. And Monkees are definitely, this is like their second year and they're so popular. I mean, I think their first 5 albums are like number 1 when they come out. But yeah, so here we got More Than Monkees, number 8, it's best-selling album. Number 9, another interesting choice, and this is How Great Thou Art by Elvis Presley. So Elvis Presley not really making any big new music at this point. It seems like he's already kind of old hat, because, you know, he doesn't really go with the psychedelic rock era at all. He's still stuck in that 50s rock, you know, early 60s rock. Definitely when the Beatles and all the British bands came along and all that, kind of took out the, you know, the wind out of Elvis's sails. I'm sure he's still making movies, so that's where he's doing a lot of his stuff. But he will have a comeback concert, I forget, coming up pretty soon. But How Great Thou Art is obviously must be a album of you know, gospel hymns. You know, he did that a lot, sang a lot of gospel hymn stuff, and did very well, evidently. It's not, finishes in the top 10 here at number 9 on the list. So still some love for Elvis Presley here in 1967. And then we finished the top 10 best-selling albums with Johnny Cash's greatest hit. So yeah, Johnny Cash, he started in the 50s. So, I mean, at least he's got 10 years in the business at this point. So I guess I kind of see that he has a lot of big hits already at this point. I mean, again, he's probably not that big at 1967 as he was in the late 50s, early 60s was kind of his peak period probably. Not knowing a lot about Johnny Cash, but that'd be my guess there. So yeah, again, popular enough though to get a greatest hits album, reach the top 10 on the charts anyways. I also wanted to mention 2 other albums that barely missed out that I thought was interesting. Is the next 2 are Monkees albums. The Monkees have 3 albums in the top 12. So that's just show how good the Monkees are doing. Because number 11, we have Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, and Jones. Number 12, we have Headquarters. So man, so Monkees are really putting out music. I mean, 3 albums this year, looks like this year. And definitely we'll see some of those on my list also, because I do like some of those albums that the Monkees make. Actually, surprisingly, really, really good. Not just, I think they get put off as just a bubblegum pop band, but they have some really good music, I think, in some of those albums anyways. But yeah, so that kind of finishes the top 10 best-selling albums. Like I said, Beatles doing very well. We get to see debut bands doing good with Jimi Hendrix and The Doors, and the Monkees are fairly new. But then we get some old people like Patsy Cline and Johnny Cash and Elvis also still coming up in the top 10. All right, so let's go to Grammy. Who won Grammy Album of the Year? And I criticize the Grammys every year for they never put the big album as they never win. You know, the album that's very the bands, the groups that are very popular. Like last year, Frank Sinatra won over the Beatles and Beach Boys, which is absolutely insane. This year, they got it correct. This is the first time that the Grammys finally got on board with what was popular for the day and what was, you know, hitting, and that is Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. So this is a very cool. It's the only time the Beatles ever won Grammy Album of the Year, which is insane. They should have won for Revolver. They should have won for Rubber Soul. You know, they should have won for Abbey Roads. You know, they should have won 4 or 5 Grammy Album of the Years at least. Crazy they only won 1, but again, that's how big this album was. That It's the only one the Grammys were willing to give to the Beatles, was this one, because it was just too good of an album for them to dismiss this time around. So it's really cool to see. This is the first time we've had the best-selling album also win Album of the Year, which is really good to see, because I think that's what you want. You want the Grammys to reflect what is popular of that day, what album is going to stand this test of time. And I think you can say this is definitely the first album probably that we talked about, because the previous albums have been, like I said, 3 Frank Sinatra albums. And again, if you're a Frank Sinatra fan, you might say those albums stand the test of time. I don't think they stand as well as Sgt. Pepper's personally, but you got like a Barbra Streisand album in there. Again, some might be Barbra Streisand fans, but I don't think people talk about her as much as they talk about the Beatles. You got like a Judy Garland live album that wins Album of the Year. You get this a Bossa Nova album wins one year, I think 65 or something like that. Anyway, so some very weird choices up to this point, but it's like finally the Grammys must have been like, okay, we've been, what's the word? We've been passing on the Beatles for all these years and trying to give to anybody but the Beatles. We're still trying to give to these older singers and not give it to the Beatles, who are the most popular band of all time. And they finally said, okay, we can't do it anymore. They finally had to concede. Yeah, Sgt. Pepper is too big of an album that we can't pass it by. We have to give it Album of the Year. So good on you, Grammys. And this is the first time a rock album won Grammy Album of the Year. So definitely, this is a year of changes, I think, in a sense that, for the Grammys anyways, that the Grammys are finally changing from just giving it to, like I said, the older singers, and starting to give it to rock bands of the time period. And we're starting to see rock music, I guess, be the mainstream music of the day and really taking over, I mean, I feel like it's been taken over for the last couple of years, but we can definitely say 67 rock and roll music is the mainstream music now of the day. And that's thanks probably to a lot of the teenagers that were growing up and falling in love with the Beatles and all the other bands, the Beach Boys and all of them, So good on you, Grammys, given to Sgt. Pepper. It's definitely very deserving. And Sgt. Pepper is not even my favorite album of the year, but it definitely deserved to win Grammy Album of the Year. Definitely correct choice. And then after that, there's definitely some strange nominations here. Because you think Sgt. Pepper, yes, very good. I mean, I wouldn't say Magical Mystery Tour. I would even love to get nominated. Like I said, you got The Doors, you got Are You Experienced are big, you got the Monkees, But instead of them, we get Francis Albert Sinatra and Antonio Carlos Jobim. That's the name of the album. So it's a Sinatra collaboration. Again, Sinatra, they still love Sinatra. He gets nominated every year and he's won 3 Grammy Album of the Years at this point. Another album that gets nominated is called It Must Be Him by Vicky Carr. I have no idea what that album is. Never heard of Vicky Carr. So that album get nominated, even though it's not anywhere near like the top 10 best-selling albums. Then we get an album called My Cup Runneth Over by Ed Ames. Excuse me. Again, never heard of Ed Ames. Never heard of this album. Sounds like another gospel hymn album, though. My Cup Runneth Over is a gospel hymn, whatever you want to call it. So I'm not sure. Again, a little surprising. I mean, you got Elvis Presley's How Great Thou Art, which was a bigger seller, but again, Ed Ames, I don't know why he got in there. And then the last album I think is very interesting is Ode to Billy Joe by Bobby Gentry. So, of course, I don't know the album that well, but I know that song was really good, and I really love that song. And so it's kind of cool. That's definitely a more current, kind of, I don't know if Bobby Gentry, I don't know much about her music, but she seems more like a folk pop singer and not a rock singer, but still good on them putting someone more current on the list that people probably listen to, or at least someone I know. So interesting, Bobby Gentry getting in there with Ode to Bobby Joe. Again, I would think The Doors or Are You Experienced maybe deserved more to be in the Grammy Album of the Year nominations, but yeah, there you go. In my opinion, one definitely deserving album. The other 4, at least 3 of them, definitely don't. I'm like, why are they in here? It's, again, mind-boggling who gets nominated, but still, we're getting better, Grammys. You're getting better at it. All right, then now I want to cover some of the big events that happened in 1967. Starting in the beginning of January 15th, the Rolling Stones changes the lyrics to let's spend the night together to let's spend some time together on the Ed Sullivan Show. This is pretty common on Ed Sullivan, him want to have a very family-friendly show, and so he would ask artists to change lyrics on their songs or do this or that, whatever. And so the Rolling Stones are one of those bands that definitely caved in and changed. You can't spend the night together; that's too risque. But we can spend some time together anyway. So I guess they caved in and did that. We know that there's been some cases where bands didn't do that, and which we'll talk about, I think, on this list as well. One interesting note, I remember reading that Bob Dylan was going to be on Ed Sullivan's show, but Ed Sullivan told Bob Dylan he didn't want him to play a certain song, and so Bob Dylan just said, okay, I'm not going to be on the show. And so Bob Dylan never showed up on the Ed Sullivan Show because of that. He could have been, and that's just the way Bob Dylan is, which makes him kind of cool. It's like, he's kind of like, it's like, if you're not going to do it my way, then I quit. That's kind of the way he did it. It's, a bit of a rebel in that sense, but kind of understandable. All right, March 25th, The Who performed their first concert in the U.S., so this is the first tour for The Who, which is interesting because they're 2 years into 65 was their debut, My Generation. So by this point, I'm guessing they've done at least a quick one. It was their second album. So now they're going to the U.S. and doing their big tour there. Of course, I like to cover a lot of Beatles stuff, so you'll hear a lot of Beatles information. But May 1st, Paul McCartney reveals that the Beatles have taken acid. And this was kind of a big deal at the time because, it's interesting because, again, the Beatles were trying to put on this image that they're almost kind of this family-friendly, wholesome group, when obviously they weren't. They're a rock and roll group. I mean, come on. They're obviously doing drugs, sleeping with different women, all the rocks, drinking, partying, and all the rock lifestyle. But up to this point, they really tried to make it act like they don't do that stuff, And what's funny about this whole story is that Paul McCartney wasn't that big on taking acid. It was really George and John were the big ones that really loved taking LSD and stuff like that. And Ringo maybe a little bit, but Paul was like the last one of the group to take acid or trip on acid and take LSD. And I think he had to be talked. He was kind of reluctant, and they had to really talk him into doing it. But this was a case where I suppose everybody kind of knew they probably were doing drugs, but they never admitted to it. And so a reporter talked to Paul, asked him, like, do you guys take, acid or something like that? And Paul said, yeah, we do. And it was a big kind of like, oh my gosh, And it's funny because Paul could have lied and said no, but for some reason Paul decided to be very honest. And I've seen the interview. It's kind of funny because the reporter's like, oh, do you think this is are you being a bad role model, or like, how does this affect the kids are listening to music or something like that? And Paul's like, I didn't come out here telling you. You asked me the question. Like, if you wouldn't have asked me the question, I wouldn't have told you. So he kind of put on the reporter that it's the reporter's fault for asking him the question. He's like, I just gave you the an honest answer. You're the one that is reporting this stuff. Anyway, so it's kind of funny that way. And it's also funny because John and George were not happy about this because it's like, so like, oh, you're outing us as taking acid, and you're the one that was reluctant to take acid, and yet you're now the one revealing our secrets, so they weren't very happy with Paul about that, which is kind of funny. Also on May 1st, Elvis marries Priscilla in Las Vegas, which was interesting. The whole story. Of course, there's a big movie called Elvis that came out. There's also a movie that's called Priscilla that came out just a year or two ago, which is an interesting movie that kind of takes the point of view of Priscilla and what everything that happened. And it's kind of a creepy story in the sense that Elvis was, overseas because he got drafted into the army, whatever, and so he was in the armed forces overseas, and that's where he meets Priscilla, because Priscilla's dad, I think, was in the military, and so she was also overseas at this point. And they met at a party, and Elvis kind of, talked to her and enjoyed talking to Priscilla because Priscilla's from America, and he's, they might have been in Germany or something like that. And so he kind of liked talking to her about America because he was around all these non-Americans. And the thing is, Priscilla was only like 15 years old or something like that. I can't remember. She was, pretty young. And so the weird factor is that he started this romantic relationship with Priscilla when she was like 15 or something, and he was like in his 20s. So doesn't sound great on paper. But yeah, they started up this kind of relationship, and then he eventually brings her back to America when he's out of the army, back to Memphis to his Graceland home. And what surprises me is that they don't get married to 67, because I swore that Elvis got out of the army like around 1960 or something like that and had his comeback album around that time. So I was like, wow, so they were in a relationship for 7, 8 years, whatever, until they got married. Like, that's what surprised me. But anyway, so yeah, so that's kind of the story there. And with Priscilla, a very interesting kind of look at what's it like for Priscilla, who was very young, caught up in this, celebrity lifestyle at such a young age, marrying one of the most famous musicians of all time, and not always being happy either. And Elvis was not the greatest husband and all that. But anyways, all right, May 15th, we have Paul meets Linda Eastman, who he eventually marries and becomes Linda McCartney. So they meet for the first time here in 67 on May 15th. Linda was a photographer, and she met a lot of, in fact, she, I don't know if she dated, but she went on dates with like Mick Jagger and some other musicians, because she was doing a lot of she took a lot of photos of different rock artists. It was kind of a big thing that she did. And they were doing a thing on the Beatles, and she was taking pictures of the Beatles, and she started, talking to Paul, probably approached her and talked to her and took a liking to her, just like a lot of other like I said, a lot of rock stars took a liking to Linda. And so then that's where they started their relationship here. So, and it was one of the best love relationships we've seen in rock history, where they're, stayed married until Linda died and all that anyways. But, so we go to June 25th, talking more about the Beatles. This is where the Beatles debuted their All You Need Is Love to close out the Our World television special, this big special where they went to all the different countries and had them, do something about their country on this World Life television event where people from all over can see, at the same time. It was a big, big event. And of course, the British very smartly picked the Beatles to represent their country. And it's like, hey, we got the greatest band in the world, the most, popular band ever. Let's have them sing a new song. Anyway, so they give it to the Beatles to come up with a song for this big event, and they did this live. Very cool. If you can go and see it on probably YouTube. But yeah, so John writes All You Need Is Love. This very, very appropriate for everybody in the world watching, hey, let's talk about love. Let's talk about something positive. And it's a great song. I really like All You Need Is Love. Very, very appropriate for the time being. On June 28th, the Supremes changed their name to Diana Ross and the Supremes. I should have done more research on this, because I can't remember exactly why they made the change, but it's kind of interesting that it went from Supremes to Diana Ross. Obviously was the lead singer of the group, the girl group, and they had a bunch of #1 hits at this point. But something must have happened there where they decided to put Diana Ross as the lead and put her name above the group, which maybe caused trouble. We'll see. All right, there's definitely some sad news this year, and one of the big sad news is Brian Epstein is found dead at age 33 in his house, I believe, his apartment, and he died of an overdose of pills. And yeah, very sad, and very, Brian Epstein's one of the most influential, managers of all time. He managed the biggest band of all time, the Beatles. He also managed some other Liverpool groups like Jerry and the Pacemakers, I know, Cilla Black, so he, very successful band manager. And he had a lot of issues, obviously, like with the Beatles, because the Beatles weren't touring anymore. I think his role was maybe diminished a little bit at this point. Maybe he's feeling a little depressed because of that. And here they just did this big television thing, All You Need Is Love, which he helped, put together. But again, this was when the Beatles were kind of like, I think they're in Wales at the time when he died. So they were traveling without him. And of course, you have to put in the fact that he was a closeted homosexual, which was looked down at that time. He had to, hide it. he did a lot of stuff in back alleys, with rough men. And so a lot of issues there, maybe a lot of depression, he's taking these pills and he overdosed on them. So very sad ending to, again, somebody that had so much, so much to do with the success of the Beatles, at this time. And I think we see the Beatles, like, after they lose kind of their leadership with Brian Epstein, they kind of start going downhill as a band. Not their music, the music's still great, but they still definitely have a lot of infighting and a lot of separation at this point. But anyways, so September 17th, here we're talking about Ed Sullivan Show again, as I mentioned before. The Doors got banned from the show because they came on the show and Ed Sullivan, they're going to sing Light My Fire, which is their big hit. And there's a part where they say, I couldn't get much higher. And Ed Sullivan told them, you can't sing that line, of course, because I couldn't get much higher refers to, getting high on drugs. And I think they said, yeah, sure, we won't. And then they went on stage, and of course, now I'm forgetting his name, the lead singer, a bit of a rebel himself, was like, screw you, I'm going to sing the lyric. And so he sings I couldn't get much higher on there, which, obviously just really upset Ed Sullivan. So, of course, that was a big controversy, and they got banned from ever going to Ed Sullivan Show again. But to me, it feels like if you're kind of this psychedelic, at this point, bands are definitely, times are changing. Bands are definitely getting more rebellious. They're getting more like, screw the man kind of mentality, I think. And like Ed Sullivan definitely was like old school, Ed Show was definitely his old school show. So I can see that like new rock bands would be like, who cares about the Ed Sullivan Show? I mean, though it was like the biggest variety show at the time. So that's why people want to get on it to get exposure. Obviously the Beatles were famous for being on there, Elvis, all that. But I can kind of see more of the rebellious rock, psychedelic rock bands that are taking drugs and doing all this stuff, be like, why? Who cares about Ed Sullivan? So, so it's interesting that happens there. Another big thing happens on the same day, evidently, from one of my research. On September 17th, also the Who have a very infamous show on the Smothers Brothers show, or infamous performance, in which they're singing My Generation, which is, I guess, and again, this is 67, that came out 65, so that song is still huge, I guess, and that's why they're singing it on the Smothers Brothers show. But they were famous, of course, for destroying their instruments. That's kind of one of their big trademarks. So I think they were supposed to, sing the song, and then at the end they're going to destroy their instruments. That was kind of the plan. What nobody knew was that Keith Moon put some explosives in his drum kit, and so they're ending the My Generation song, and Townsend is starting to bash his guitar. And it's crazy. Again, you have to watch on YouTube. It's one of the craziest things I've ever seen. They're there bashing. All of a sudden, boom, big explosion. Drum kit goes off, and all you see is smoke everywhere. And, and you see Pete Townsend kind of, probably stunned by this big explosion going through the smoke, and it's absolutely insane. Like, it's like, man, Keith Mooney could have killed somebody. What if he killed somebody with that explosion? That's how reckless he was. But he was trying to, he didn't want to be outdone, I think, on the, destroying the instruments. So he's like, I'm gonna put some explosives in my drum kit and really, show everybody up, but still, it's such a crazy thing. If you watch it, go on YouTube and watch it. It's so crazy how dangerous that was. All right, October 18th, the first issue of Rolling Stone magazine comes out this year. And can you guess who's going to be on the cover of the very first Rolling Stones? If you guessed John Lennon, you would be correct. Yes, John Lennon was the first to be on the cover. Of course, Beatles being the biggest band, John being very popular at that time. It kind of no surprise there. Interesting, the picture though is from the movie How I Won the War, which was a Dick Lester movie that he was making. And John had some downtime because they weren't touring, and Lester asked him if he would be in this movie, How I Won the War. And so Lennon said, yeah, sure, I'll help you out, since Lester directed him in Hard Day's Night and Help already. And I've heard it's not a very good movie. It's not I can't find the movie myself. I've tried to find that movie, and it must be a very hard movie to find. Anyways, I've seen clips on YouTube kind of what's going on. But from what I understand, John Lennon didn't have a good experience because it's very boring being on a movie set, because there's a lot of just standing around waiting for, the lighting and everything to be, the set to be set, and then you do your scenes, whatever. And I don't think he liked it that much. But anyways, but yeah, so that's a trivia for you if you want to know what was the first picture on Rolling Stone magazine. It was John Lennon in the movie How I Won the War. All right, now we're getting late 1967, and now we got to talk about another really sad death that happened this year. December 8th, Otis Redding, he died in a plane crash in Madison, Wisconsin. So another plane death too. It seems like we see this all the time. How many, big rock stars have died in plane crashes? It's really terrible. And we get another one here with Otis Redding, who I think was just coming off some of his most popular music, like to me, the one I know the most is, of course, Sitting on the Dock of the Bay. It's a really great song. To me, the song I really know about Otis Redding. Besides that, I don't know a lot about him. I think he did a lot more blues music, which I'm not into. But yeah, I feel like he put out a big album at this point when he died, and kind of came out posthumously, like this big Otis Redding album after he passed away, if I remember right. But yeah, another great musician unfortunately dies. I don't know how old he was, but definitely died before his time. All right, the last event I'm going to talk about is on December 26th. We get the telecast of Magical Mystery Tour. So Magical Mystery Tour, this movie that really was the brainchild of Paul McCartney, kind of came up with this idea of like, hey, let's write and direct our own movie, we have no experience. And so they come up with this crazy idea of this Magical Mystery Tour, which is a mess of a movie, plot-wise, story-wise, acting. It is a really terrible made movie. And it was really a TV-made movie that appeared, I think, in Great Britain probably at this time, December 26th. And it came out in black and white. And the whole point of the movie was to show all these psychedelic colors. But you couldn't see the colors because it was on black and white televisions. Anyway, so it definitely bombed. And again, it was only like maybe an hour, a little over an hour long. So it's definitely not a very long movie, quote unquote movie. And it's kind of infamous for being bad. And I've seen it a couple times. Yeah, it's horrible. The music's really good though. It does have some great, especially I'm the Walrus is such a great moment, iconic moment for the Beatles and for kind of music videos in a sense. But yeah, so that's when Magical Mystery Tour came out. Totally bombed, but brought us a really great album, in my opinion. All right, then I just want to talk about what new artists kind of came out this year. That'd be big. Pink Floyd came out. And then again, I think this means like their debut albums came out this year and they started becoming a thing. So Pink Floyd coming out this year. Of course, to talk about the Jimi Hendrix Experience, come out with their first album, or Experience, which was huge. The Doors come out with their debut album, The Doors. The Velvet Underground come out with an album, which I don't know what that is. I know they have a big album with the Nico and the Underground, whatever. Maybe soon after this. Moby Grape, who I don't know that much about, but I've heard of them, debut this year. And then we got Procol Harum, who I know eventually do Watershades of Pale. Traffic, which I'm not that familiar with Traffic, but I heard there's some fans there for that band. Dolly Parton debuting, one of the biggest country singers of all time. Of course, I don't really cover country music, but still definitely a huge artist coming out with her debut. Cat Stevens, we have, I think, Tea of the Tillerman is a big album that comes out for her. I'm kind of considered one of his probably best albums. It has Wild World on it. It was kind of his big song on that one. We got the Grateful Dead, which would have this very popular cult following. I think they're a terrible band. I never cared for them, but evidently they're debuting this time period. We got Al Green, really great singer. The Fifth Dimension. I don't know if they're psychedelic, but kind of probably an R&B band. David Bowie, whose original name was David Jones, and then had to change it because of David Jones from the Monkees. But David Bowie's debuting this year as well. We got Van Morrison. We got a lot of people. I'm sorry, this is a long list, but a lot of big names here. But Van Morrison, who go on to make some really great music. Arlo Guthrie, which I believe is the son of Woody Guthrie. He's a very good folk singer as well. We got Sly and the Family Stone. Again, I'm not real familiar with them, but I know they got some big, I don't know if they're bigger in the disco era of music, but they come out this year. And then lastly, we got Leonard Cohen, who's considered one of the great songwriters who wrote, I believe, Hallelujah's his big song anyways. So he's also debuted. Terrible singer, but good songwriter. So yeah, lots of big stuff happening this year. Another big year in music, in my opinion, 1967. And yeah, so that's the big stuff that happens. If I miss anything, definitely let me know in the comments what I missed out of this year. But that's a review of the year in about 40 minutes or so. So hopefully you enjoyed that. You learned something maybe about what happened in music of this year. Again, stay tuned on my channel for tomorrow, 8:30 p.m. Central Standard Time, for me, Brian, Nick's top 10 albums of 1967. Definitely going to have some Beatles in there. You're going to have some big albums, I think. And you probably have some hot takes as well. So hopefully you enjoy that anyways. Besides that, thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you for liking it. Thank you to all my subscribers for supporting the channel. I appreciate you all and hope you have a good day.